Hey guys, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you, and today we're going to talk about knives that I would consider buying above or before the Paramilitary 2. Now, you should probably buy a Para 2 anyway. It is a great knife. It's one that I love and that I still carry quite often, but there are some Spydercos that I enjoy just a little bit more that if someone were to say to me, hey Kevin, I'm thinking of buying a Para 2, are there other knives I should look at? I would recommend some of the ones on these lists, and I would also recommend these as some of the best EDC Spydercos out there. Now, this is not totally based on my preference, okay? I've tried to include some knives that others might enjoy, okay? And so let me say, not every knife on this list is my personal favorite, but I think they're knives that maybe someone else's personal favorite, that someone else may actually enjoy more than the Para 2. So let's go ahead and get into the list, beginning with the very first and perhaps most obvious option, and that is the Manix. All right, the Manix it has a lot going for it that I think makes it very, very considerable. So it's a little bit smaller in pocket. Now it's still pretty large in terms of the real estate it's going to take up, no question about that. Okay, you can see how these two kind of compare in that regard. But for that space in pocket, you're getting still, you're getting about the same blade length in a shorter handle. So the blade to handle ratio is a little bit better. Let me say both of these suffer a little. They both of them have a blade that's pretty short for the handle, which is always a little bit annoying to me. However, the trade-off is, of course, ergonomic. So both of these are pretty comfortable in hand. The Manix, to me, is much more comfortable. And maybe not much more, that's a little unfair. I like the Para 2 quite a bit. It feels pretty good in hand, but the Manix feels great in hand. It really, really is one of my favorite examples of a highly ergonomic knife. And that's especially true of the lockback. Okay. I know there are a lot of variations of the Manix out there. We've talked about this before. My favorite is the lockback, and it's largely because of ergonomics and just the solidity. I think it balances out the being strong and capable versus also not being too crazy heavy. So the regular Manix with the stainless steel liners is a little heavy for what it is. This reduces a lot of that weight. It doesn't go as light as the lightweight, and I just don't like the feel of the lightweight. It feels like a cheap toy to me when I'm holding it. I know it's not. I know it's strong. I know it's good, but the feel of it just doesn't feel confidence inspiring to me. So I would go with a really, really good alternative to the Para Tube, and probably my most recommended Spyderco would be some version of the Manix series. My favorite is by far the lockback, but I know some of you will go with various options, and there are quite a few of them out there. The next knife on the list, and this kind of comes up because of the Paramilitary 3. I'm not a huge fan of the Paramilitary 3. The Para 2 is already not a big knife, so I don't know why it needed to be smaller already, but Spyderco already had a fantastic smallish knife that would be a great alternative if you needed something a little on the smaller end, and that is the Sage series. The Spyderco Sage series is probably my favorite smallish knife series. Now, I don't own any because you guys know my preference is for larger knives, and really I feel like the Manix is like a slightly larger Sage, so it doesn't make sense for me to own one. But having said that, of all the small knives I've handled, the Sage may be the very best feeling in hand of all of the small knives that I have used and carried. It's ergonomically fantastic. It does have that shorter blade, so it gets you to that point. If this is a knife that's just much too big for you, the Sage might be a really, really good option. And so I highly recommend checking that out if you feel like the Para is just not going to cut it for you. Next up is another really, really cool alternative. Now, this is going to go a little fancier, but a very similar philosophy of use. You're going to get some more blade length. You're going to get a handle that's just as comfortable, if not even a little bit more comfortable, and that is from the Spyderco Capara. Really, really nice looking knife, designed for kitchen use. Okay, it still has the Spydernomics with that bit of a choil. real carbon fiber, which is really nice. It drives me a little bit crazy when Spyderco uses that carbon fiber sticker, which makes me crazy. And I know it's not really a sticker. I'm simplifying it, oversimplifying it to make a point. But the Capara is gorgeous. I think it's a much nicer looking knife than the Para 2. It feels great in hand. It's just as easy to carry. It's a little bit bigger in terms of blade length. Like the Capara has a lot going for it to recommend it above the Paramilitary 2. So that one is a really, really easy one to talk about, and it's just a fantastic EDC option. Next on the list, number 4, is one of my favorite Spydercos and one that I happen to have in a great configuration. This is the S90V carbon fiber Spider Native Chief. And the Native Chief is by far my favorite thing out of the Native lineup. All right, the Native is great all on its own, and it might be another good. I don't like it as much as the Sage in terms of ergonomics, but it's a pretty decent knife. Now take that, which is for me much too small, and stretch it out like this, and this is something really, really cool. So you may recall the Shaman, which is also on this list, by the way, was supposed to be sort of a beefed up Native, and it kind of is, but I feel like this sort of retains a lot of the, it's slim, it's fairly lightweight, it's really slicey in terms of the blade grind, and all those things sort of carry over from the original Native, where the Shaman, made like a beefy, hard use Native, which is a different animal. So, comfortable in hand, really cool looking knife, really, really useful. I love this sort of overall shape here that does come directly from the Native. I love the ability to choke up on this. And then you've got all of this blade. This one, of course, happens to be S90V, but even in the standard configuration, you get a ton of blade and a ton of utility in this fairly large, substantial knife. And this is definitely a knife that I would, if I had to pick one of these only, I would definitely be picking the Native Chief. Really, really good knife. And again, now let me say this, I guess. I know it doesn't have the compression lock, but I think the compression lock works well on the Para 2, but I don't love all the applications of it. In fact, there's a knife coming up in a little bit where I actually don't love the way they've done the compression lock on it. Before we get to that, though, another Para 2 alternative. This is the Spyderco Gale Bradley 2. Gale Bradley is he designs knives for cutting competitions. This has this great hollow grind M4 steel, fantastic blade. One of my favorite blades on any Spyderco. The ergonomics are excellent, and the nice thing about this knife is, I feel like it's very, very tough and capable. Well, not being, if we close these. All right, you can see that the Gale Bradley is going to be a little smaller in the pocket. It still feels great in hand, and it gives this phenomenal high performance blade that I really, really like. And you guys know, I do like hollow grinds a lot more than flat grinds, and that's because that thinness behind the edge just makes them perform so well. All right, and the way these two blades are, the complaint about hollow grinds is that you can break them. Well, one, I've never broken a knife like in the middle of the blade like this. I don't know what you would have to do to achieve that, but you shouldn't have been doing it with a folding knife anyway. Number one. Number two, I'm going to take cutting performance, and well, I guess in this case, number two is, if you look at the blade stock on these, look at how much material that hollow grind is able to achieve out here at the tip compared to the much finer tip on the Para 2, which, if you're going to look for durability, it's likely the tip that's going to break anyway. So I think the Gale Bradley 2 is a really, really nice option. Now, again, I'm not in love with the standard version of this with the carbon fiber scales, or carbon fiber laminate scales. So these are from Sharp Dressed Knives, and He does such a great job. I feel like if you want a Gale Bradley, it's worth getting one and then buying the scales just to have this phenomenal knife. Now, since that time, I have also changed out the clip to an MXG clip, and so yeah, I get that this knife, there's a bit of an investment involved, but I absolutely love it. And even in its standard configuration, there's a lot to recommend the Gale Bradley over the Para 2. All right. The one complaint that I guess I should bring this one last point up. The one complaint that you always get is the accessible lock bar. And look, the lock bar is a little bit proud, and I don't really have a problem getting my fingers on it. And I'm a stickler for this. I really, really dislike knives that I can't get my fingers on the lock bar. But I just don't find this to be one that's all that bad, even though I know a lot of people complain about it. All right. Next on the list is a knife that is one of my favorite Spydercos, and it has a couple of things that really, really recommend it. That is the Spyderco Amalgam. Now, the big thing that I like about the amalgam versus the Para 2, one, it's a little thinner, so even though it's bigger and carries more blade, it feels like less of a knife in pocket. And then when you get it in hand, the ergonomics on the amalgam are absolutely perfect. This feels so great in hand that this is, this is not a perfect knife. There are a couple little things. One, I do love the look of this knife, but it's not the best implementation of the compression lock that's ever been done. And the flipper, I'm going to try to do it on purpose. I've had this knife for a long time. So see how the flipper tab is contacting my finger right now. All right, so in order to shut it all the way, I've got to move my finger out of there and then shut it. People have complained about that. For me, those things are really, really easy to overlook to get a knife that's this comfortable in hand and this large and this attractive. And all of those things are things that I value more. All right, so yes, I can sit here with my Para 2 and do this, where I may not be able to do it with the amalgam. That's not my primary desire in a knife, to be able to fidget with it constantly. And so for me, the amalgam is a better option, especially because of the extra comfort. And the thing is, when you fold these down in terms of what you're carrying, the amalgam does really, really well. Like I don't know. I would take an amalgam over a Para 2 most of the time. Okay, what else is on the list? And that's with those imperfections that are legitimate. There are some complaints there that people have that I agree with. All right, what else have we got on the list? Knives that you might want to look at over the Para 2. We've already talked about the amalgam. We brought up the Shaman a few minutes ago, and the Shaman is another one that it has some issues, but it does feel really nice in hand, and I like that really robust blade. And that might be, if you're someone who says the Para 2, the blade isn't just quite robust enough. Outside of that, the construction is not all that overbuilt compared to the Para 2. Very, very similar. In fact, my biggest complaint on the Shaman is it has these little tiny washers that I don't think belong on a knife that's designed for that purpose. So that makes me a little bit nuts, but otherwise, really, really nice knife. Very comfortable in hand, pretty enjoyable all around. And yeah, I can definitely see a lot of situations. For me, probably not, but for a lot of people, I can definitely see situations where they would take a Shaman over a Para 2. Next up on the list is the Spyderco Spidey Chef. Great knife. Not my favorite Spyderco. I don't love the way it feels in hand, but it does have one really, really cool feature, and that is it is almost entirely rust proof. So if you're someone who needs that knife that just cannot rust, maybe you're always sweating and you're always wet and you live in a damp environment, or maybe you live in the jungle or something like that, that can be a really, really good option for you. So that, I think, is one that for some people with those needs can be really, really good. The other nice thing about the Spidey Chef is it's really sheeple friendly, so you can pull that thing out almost anywhere. No one's going to complain about it. I don't know that too many people complain about this either, but yeah, could be. Next on the list, again, two knives that I'm going to put in here: the Spyderco Yojimbo 2, Yojimbo 2, or the Spyderco Yojumbo. Both really, really good implementations of the compression lock. Both highly enjoyable knives. If you want that Wharncliffe blade shape, if that's more suited to your kind of EDC tasks, the hollow grind again is my preference. And that's one of the things that would move a knife onto this list. I'm going to take a hollow grind over a flat grind pretty much every time. And then depending on you and your preferences and the size of person you are, you could either go with the Yojimbo that has like a 4-inch blade, or the Yojimbo with a 3-inch blade, and pretty much meet whatever needs you have. Now, I want to bring up a couple of points here. One, why are there no budget Spideys, right? Why didn't you say, get a Tenacious? It costs way less. Well, it's because I just don't find the budget Spydercos that compelling. In that area of comparison, I just think there are some companies, Civivi is a great example, that just does a better job, right? If you're looking at a Spyderco Tenacious, buy a Dogma, buy a Backlash, buy a Shredder, buy a Riffle. There's a bunch of budget Civivis that are just better made, better steel, just overall, superior to the Tenacious. So that's why there aren't any budget Spydercos on the list. I just don't find they're doing a great job right now. And by the way, when it comes to, overseas, well, guess what? All the budget Spydercos are made in China by Senran Yu. So you're not, you're still supporting China no matter what. The other thing that I want to bring up is, why no Endurodelica, right? And it's because I really don't think the Endurodelica hold a candle to the Para 2. I would take a Para 2. I would even take like a Para 3 lightweight or something over an Endura or Delica. It's not that they're bad knives, but I don't like them nearly as much. If I'm going to go with a budget backlock like that, I'm going to go with something from Cold Steel, right? The Broken Skull, or the Recon 1, or the American Lawman. I'd take any of those over the Endurodelica stuff. Even the Code 4. I know I got way off base there and stopped talking about Spydercos, but those are some of the options that I would be looking at if I was interested in something similar to a Para 2. Let me throw in, I guess I'm not going to be able to fit all the knives back in here. Spyderco does do a great job, and I'm definitely a fan. It's not that I dislike the Para 2 either, and lots of times, even though I have all these options, guess what? The Para 2 still ends up in my pocket, but there are definitely some really worthy alternatives to the Para 2 that you might want to consider if you're looking at one. Thanks a lot for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to check those channel sponsors. That is a huge help to the channel, and we will talk to you soon.